Hello, my name is Adrian Goldberg and welcome to Byline Radio, or if you're listening on Catch Up, the Byline Times podcast. This time, Boris Johnson, Brexit, Rwanda and the Northern Ireland Protocol. As we'll hear, these things are all connected. Before anything else, though, just a reminder that Byline Radio and the Byline Times podcast are funded by subscriptions to the Byline Times, a brilliant monthly newspaper edited by Hardeep Matharu, and we'll be hearing from Hardeep shortly. When you take out a subscription to the Byline Times, you're supporting some of the best independent journalism around. We don't have a wealthy proprietor in the background pulling our strings, so we can report without fear or favour. So please do subscribe if you can. You get details of how to subscribe at our website, bylinetimes.com. And if you've already taken out a subscription, thank you. Now, this sounds like a riddle for the ages. What links Boris Johnson, Brexit, Rwanda and the Northern Ireland Protocol? Don't worry, it's not as difficult as it sounds. The protocol is the trade deal struck by Johnson with the European Union when the UK left the EU. He called it oven ready. Now it seems half-baked. The protocol was designed to prevent a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. This would have breached the terms of the Good Friday Agreement that secured peace in the north. But the price of achieving that was to leave Northern Ireland in trade terms effectively part of the EU. Since we're not in the European Union, there has to be a trade border somewhere, even if it's an invisible one. So now it's in the Irish Sea, something Johnson said would only happen over his dead body. That hasn't pleased Northern Ireland Unionists, or indeed some Conservative MPs. So the Prime Minister has introduced the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill that would see the UK effectively rip up the deal. The EU says that's illegal. So where does Rwanda come into all this? Well, the government is also upset that its plan to deport asylum seekers to Africa was scuppered by the European Court, which upholds the Convention on Human Rights. Now the government, urged on by some of its backbenchers and right-wing tabloids, has hinted that it might quit the Convention on Human Rights. But unfortunately for them, the convention underpins the Good Friday Agreement. As the Liberal Democrat MP Alan Carmichael put it, the government is threatening to leave the ECHR in order to fulfil its Rwanda policy, but the UK cannot leave the ECHR without breaking the Good Friday Agreement. They are mutually exclusive. It is, to put it politely, a muddle. We're joined by Byline Times editor Hardeep Matharu, as I mentioned, and also by John Kyle, an Ulster Unionist Party councillor in Belfast. Hardeep, firstly to you, it is a muddle, isn't it?
Yeah, Adrian, you've done a really good job, I think, of summarising it all in very clear terms. It is a muddle. And you know, it's just to take a step back as to where we are. I just think it's incredible. I mean, we've had in 1 week all of this stuff about the Northern Ireland Protocol, again, coming to the fore. Now with Rwanda, these suggestions that we could leave the ECHR, which has been sort of on the cards for a while. The government's been talking about, you know, British judges need to be deciding on our own laws, our own rights, very much been part of the wider Brexit narrative. But these points have conflated in recent weeks, as you've pointed out. And for me, the really big thing, again, stepping back from all of this, is when did we become a country, a government, for which the law is something that you not only can choose to, opt into if you want to or change, but not only that, but weaponize? When did the rule of law, not only at home, but also in terms of our international obligations, when did that become something that it's fair game and normalized to weaponize and politicize? And we saw that the Law Society of England and Wales today, which is the body which represents lawyers in this country, spoke out against Boris Johnson's attacks and his government's attacks and the cabinet minister's attacks on lefty activist lawyers who are trying to get in the way of the things that the government wants to achieve. So it is really complicated. I think it is really an unprecedented time because, as we've said before on this podcast, and I've appeared on it, Britain has the mother of parliaments. The whole point about Britain was its rule of law has been so second to none, and it's something that we apparently exported around the world. So it's really interesting to see now what's happening in this country.
Yeah, and of course we saw law breaking during COVID. 126 fixed penalty notices issued for people working in and around Downing Street, including the Prime Minister himself. So very little regard for the law in that instance, and now very little regard for an international treaty the UK has signed. And Simon Coveney, Ireland's foreign minister, has said that countries around the world will take a dim view of Britain if it is perceived to be a country that cannot be trusted in terms of its international obligations.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you talk about Partygate as well, Adrian, because, that in itself is not actually an isolated scandal, because, as you say, it's about law breaking. And whether it's on that level of the parties that were held in Downing Street, or when it comes to the ECHR, the Good Friday Agreement, the Northern Ireland Protocol, or Rwanda, what we're seeing is very much that law breaking that's at the heart of the Johnson government actually playing out on an international level. And, it's really interesting that also, the rule of law is meant to be something that sits above politics. We're meant to have things that are in our constitution, fundamental values that underpin our political system, like the rule of law, which aren't things that usually have been meddled with or questioned or weaponized. And that's what really has been on my mind this week as well, that of course, the world is aghast at this, looking at what we're doing, because we're essentially saying the law is what we say it is, and if we don't like that, we're going to change it or go our own way. And I think in this country, we've had Lord Geit, who's was the independent advisor on ministerial standards to Johnson, essentially his ethics advisor, who's resigned tonight. And when it comes to the ministerial code, Boris Johnson has already rewritten the forward of that in the wake of the Sue Gray report to say that, ministers who break certain sort of standards expected in public life will no longer be compelled to resign. And so my question is, what do we have in our system which genuinely sits above politics now, whether that comes to the conventions and norms of politics that it's always been expected prime ministers will stick to, or the rule of law? And I think that just one last point I'd make is, Donald Trump, even Donald Trump couldn't come into power and suddenly abolish the US Constitution or the Supreme Court, or say, well, I'm not going to recognize the Supreme Court and the fact that it has a certain role to play in looking at laws. Even he couldn't do that, because the US Constitution is something that absolutely sits above politics. The only thing in this country that sits above politics, we're told, is the Queen. So I don't see how that helps us, given our current juncture.
It's perhaps helpful for the government as well, in that there is, I think, a confusion about the European Convention on Human Rights, because it has the word European at the start of it. I think many people assume that it is linked to the European Union, and it is not. And Britain's signing of the European Convention predates our membership of the EU.
Yes, because we're a member of the Council of Europe. The European Convention on Human Rights came out of the post-Second World War era, where we saw the genocide of the Holocaust. Churchill was very much part of the formation of those laws and rights that came out of what happened in that conflict. And yeah, again, the confusion, the deliberate conflation between EU judges and the ECHR, which are completely different bodies and have a completely different genesis, is something that helps the government and helps it in its weaponization for cultural war ends. All of these questions around the rule of law. In the last week, it's still on our digital front page on our website. Boris Johnson's second cousin, Annika Campbell, who lives in America, she got in touch and said she wanted to publish an open letter, which we have done on Byline Times, to Boris Johnson. And the main reason she wanted to do that was because she was just aghast that Boris Johnson's grandfather, her uncle, Sir James Fawcett, was a distinguished human rights barrister. His whole career was spent looking at these issues. For 20 years, he was a member of the European Commission for Human Rights. For half of that time, he was its president. That body turned into to the European Convention on Human Rights, which was then incorporated into British law through the Human Rights Act. So she just couldn't believe that the life's work of his grandfather, Boris Johnson, was now dismantling. But again, the thing I find really concerning is it's not really about policy. This is about politics and culture war politics. If this was really about well thought through policies that was strategically, carefully looked at, we wouldn't be in the position we're in now, either when it comes to Northern Ireland Protocol or Rwanda. So it's very hard to conclude that this isn't about politics. This isn't about culture war, talking points, red meat for the tabloids, and rhetoric and iconography for the Johnson government. And that is really concerning.
And John, for you in Belfast, this is a really important issue. Just try and explain to people who live in other parts of the UK and perhaps in other parts of the world who are listening to us why the Northern Ireland Protocol is so important in Northern Ireland.
Well, Adrian, the Northern Ireland Protocol on one level can be viewed as a trade agreement, a way to handle the UK's exit from the European Union while protecting the relationship between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland. However, it is more than just a trade agreement because it's resulted in an Irish sea border. It does strike to the heart of the identity of unionists who see themselves as British, whose aspiration is to remain a part of the United Kingdom, who see themselves very much committed to the United Kingdom, find that now there is a border inside the United Kingdom which is between them and the rest of Great Britain. Now that is a very emotive issue. It's a very difficult issue. It's a very unnerving development. And the Good Friday Agreement, the genius of the Good Friday Agreement was that it addressed the aspirations and cultural identities of both communities within Northern Ireland, creating a balance so that those who saw themselves as Irish and who looked to the south of Ireland and who identified themselves with the Irish nation were able to continue to be Irish and to move freely between Northern Ireland and the south of Ireland. While those who saw themselves as British were able to remain British, identify as British, and were a part of the United Kingdom. So it was a carefully crafted, balanced agreement that weighed people's relative aspirations, hopes and identities. Now, with the introduction of the Northern Ireland Protocol, it preserved that link between the North and the South. The North-South arm or leg of the Good Friday Agreement was preserved, but the East-West arm or leg of the Good Friday Agreement, or the Belfast Agreement, was significantly damaged. And that created real problems in Northern Ireland, problems for unionists. And that's why every unionist politician has said the Northern Ireland Protocol needs to change. So the Good Friday Agreement, which really brought stability to Northern Ireland, to the island of Ireland, it has been seriously impacted by the Northern Ireland Protocol. And that's why, to sort of try and brush it aside and say, okay, let's just see how it pans out, let's carry on and see what happens when the dust settles, that's not going to work, because there's been it has serious implications for the stability of the country and for the outworking of the Good Friday Agreement, or the Belfast Agreement.
And perhaps because of the compromise brokered through the Good Friday Agreement, which allowed both communities in the north to maintain their identities and their separate aspirations, the people of Northern Ireland voted as a whole to remain within the EU. This is a problem that has been caused by Brexit. But I just wonder, John, when people look at the post-Brexit settlement, when they look at the Northern Ireland Protocol, can unionists not say, well, OK, this is not ideal. It's not really what we would have wanted because it perhaps weakens our link with the rest of the United Kingdom, but we remain politically within the United Kingdom. We can still fly our Union Jacks. We still have our British passports. Why is it so important to unionists not to have this invisible border down the Irish Sea?
Well, really because they feel that their British identity their British citizenship has been undermined. So that their citizenship is not the same as it was prior to Brexit or prior to the Northern Ireland Protocol being implemented or instituted. So therefore, goods travelling from Great Britain into Northern Ireland all must have a customs declaration. There's enormous paperwork. There is effectively a trade border between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom. And I think that does strike at the unionist identity. There is the danger that Northern Ireland then begins to drift and diverge away from the rest of the United Kingdom, and its trade becomes reorientated so it is primarily a north-south economy, rather than an economy that's rooted and embedded within the United Kingdom. So when political aspirations and political identities are so crucial in Northern Ireland and were the cause of the troubles, of the civil conflict, if we undermine the balance that was achieved through the Good Friday Agreement, then we destabilise the political systems here in Northern Ireland. That's why we have the impasse that we have in the moment. That's why things really have ground to a halt, because we're unable to resolve what is seen as an imbalance between the two communities, between the aspirations and identities of the two communities.
Yeah, and I'm not seeking to downplay that in any way, John. I think we've learned over recent years, whether it's through the appeal to British nationalism or English nationalism through Johnson, or the appeal to nationalism in the United States through Donald Trump or Bolsonaro in Brazil, we've understood, I think, perhaps more than people of a liberal bent might previously have recognised, the incredible power of nationalism and of identity. But at a practical level, you'll be aware, I'm sure, that Northern Ireland has, under the protocol, outperformed the rest of the UK economically. It seems as though that the damage wrought to the rest of the British economy post-Brexit as a result of leaving the European Union has been less in Northern Ireland, precisely because of the Northern Ireland Protocol. Yet despite that, in a sense, the idea of UK or British identity trumps economic self-interest.
Yes, that's absolutely right, Adrian. There are clearly potential benefits from the Northern Ireland Protocol. There are economic opportunities. There is access to a huge European market and to a very significant British market, the fifth largest economy in the world. So there are economic and trade benefits, potential benefits from it. But there are also these downsides. And for people, people consider their identity to be more important often than how many pounds they have in their pocket. And so they don't want to be bought off. And then the other point to make is that within when the economy is performing well, the people who benefit most are often those who are the wealthiest, those who are well off, the middle classes, those who are at the bottom of the economic ladder, those who live in deprivation or in poverty. They're the ones who are the last to feel those economic benefits. So for someone who's living in a working class estate that is suffering with the cost of living crisis, with the huge issues that there are in terms of the mental health crises that we face, with the National Health Service problems accessing care, for them, their life does not appear to be any better now than it was before Brexit. In fact, it appears to be worse. And so to say to them, well, look, the economy is doing better. We've got 1.3% growth and the rest of the UK has got minus 1.3% growth. That is not really going to work for people whose lives are pretty grim and who are struggling to make ends meet under increasing pressure due to the cost of living crisis.
But Hardeep, it just strikes me as curious that Johnson has clearly recognised the power of English nationalism, and that motivated much of the appeal of Brexit and the harking back to empire that we've discussed previously on the podcast. Yet he seems either ignorant of the depth of feeling in Northern Ireland or doesn't seem to care about it, because clearly the sense of unionist identity and affiliation with the UK is just as strong, if not stronger, than that English nationalists feel towards their particular part of these islands.
And again, it's really interesting, isn't it, that the full name of the Tory party is the Conservative and Unionist Party. So you would think that Boris Johnson would have some interest, if not knowledge or foresight of these problems of the Northern Ireland Protocol and what the Irish Sea border has done. But I think that, as you say, English nationalism, or the sense that England is sort of the Conservatives' main territory, where it's seemingly doing quite well. The 2019 general election brought various constituencies together in the north of England and in the sort of blue shires in the south. There is this sense that there's a real complacency and a lack of, or a complete recklessness, to be frank, about the union as a whole. I think, this week Nicola Sturgeon has said, well, I'm going to make the case for a second independence referendum for Scotland. It's hard to see how that couldn't be, the case for that couldn't be powerfully made and isn't something that, is justified, to be honest, after everything that we've seen in terms of Brexit and the hard Brexit we've ended up in and what Scotland wanted. But in terms of Northern Ireland, I think as been said and as we can hear, that the Troubles were such a defining period for the United Kingdom in its modern political history. And it took so much work for the Labour government to achieve the Good Friday Agreement. And I think the fact that Johnson is just so careless and politically expedient in terms of focusing on England, that he just doesn't care about the damage that is being caused in a very in a very practical sense, tells us a lot about the modern Tory party under him and what his priorities are, and politically who he wants to appeal to. I also think, we expect sort of politicians and people in public life to have these amazing hinterlands and to know things about the world and history. But I don't always think that's the case, Adrian. I think more and more as we see every day things that go on, and any given cabinet minister who talks about any given issue in a way that's completely inaccurate or misleading, or just shows just a basic lack of knowledge. I think that's a misconception that actually politicians don't have. They haven't they're not necessarily experts on everything, and they're employing experts in the form of civil servants to do that for them. But ultimately, it stops with them. And if we have people who are putting political expedience before anything else, even the Union of the United Kingdom, this is what we end up with.
Yeah, I'm just when Johnson survived his vote of confidence, albeit with many of his backbench MPs opposing him in that vote of confidence, one of the charges raised against him was his lack of a strategic brain. And you look at this particular moment, and it just seems to me that this focuses that allegation right now. Again, to quote the Lib Dem MP Alan Carmichael, the government threatening to leave the European Convention on Human Rights in order to fulfil its Rwanda policy, but you can't leave the ECHR without breaking the Good Friday Agreement. They are mutually exclusive. And yet, this doesn't appear to have occurred to Johnson, or if it has, he didn't care anyway. I mean, neither explanation is particularly flattering to him.
Yeah, no, it's not, Adrian. And I think it's also what is driving him. So if your main aim is to come up with, to be strategic and come up with policy that's genuinely going to advance your aims as a government, but also keep in check all of these really careful, agreements and international dynamics, then if that's your aim, then what you're going to end up with is, rigorous policy. Which people might not agree with, politically from all sides of the spectrum. You might not agree with it politically, but you could agree that it has been rigorously thought through. But if your main aim isn't that, but if your main aim is to look at what the newspaper headlines are saying, what the rhetoric is that's whipped up around your government, what are the talking points that fit into sort of cultural war narratives that can be amplified, if that's your main aim, then in a way, where we are now in terms of these areas such as Rwanda and the Northern Ireland Protocol, it's not surprising at all. And I think that's the point. The weaponization of these issues has been done recklessly, because they serve a political end, but the byproduct of that is they cause major problems for the UK, not just for Northern Ireland itself and, the tensions and the identity issues there, but just in terms of our standing on the world stage and what it does to our reputation. We're not even keeping to the laws that we have made, and if we can't even do that, how can anyone around the world think that, we're the kind of country that they can trade with and negotiate with and, do agreements with? But I think it's fundamentally that difference in Johnson's starting point. I think it's pure political expediency, which has led us to where we are. And the Rwanda policy, for example, I often think there are even polls that show that since the referendum happened, immigration has sort of decreased generally in terms of the public's priorities. They care about the cost of living crisis and how, they're going to make ends meet. Immigration has fallen, down the list somewhat. But having the Rwanda policy, even though it wasn't properly thought through, even though it was never properly costed. So the Priti Patel, when she announced it, said that she would personally, as a Secretary of State, essentially vouch for its cost. These policies are designed to amplify issues that arguably are not issues among the public as a whole. They may be to a small section of the Conservative Party's members, the backbenchers, and people generally in the country, but they're not massive issues that are causing that are causing major problems for for most people's lives every day. And I think that's the point. It's very subtle, but this Rwanda policy has massively, disproportionately, again brought to the fore this notion that there are people trying to come here and take advantage, and we need to stop them. And again, the sort of hardline approach that appeals to a base of a minority of people, and yet it skews everything and leads us to potentially withdrawing from the ECHR, which I think is appalling.
Yeah, what's that I hear, Hardeep? Oh, it's a dog whistle, isn't it? I noticed that on GB News tonight, almost if Conservative Central Office could have ordered it. I'm sure they didn't. Dan Wootton tonight. Big poll running on Twitter. Do we need a referendum on leaving the European Convention of Human Rights? And it's that sense that there are people out there who clearly take their lead from Johnson and who may indeed be feeding into Johnson in terms of ideas and what passes for a strategy, but certainly people feeding off him and putting out these narratives there. And I'm going to speak to John in a moment about kind of what that means for real people on the ground in Belfast. But clearly Johnson and his government say these things, and there are willing messengers only too happy to construe his messages in precisely the way that he wants them to, unquestioningly.
Yes, exactly this, Adrian, and that's the point. So he will have his intention of phrasing things in the way he does, coming up with the political choices that he does. But it's what then happens to that. I remember just before we had the UN Climate Change Summit in Scotland last November, and Johnson was interviewed, and he talked about how the climate emergency really was an important issue. And he basically said that the main reason we need to take it seriously is because he made some analogy with uncontrolled migration had led to the end of the Roman Empire. And there were so many column inches dedicated to how that was historically inaccurate, but none really looked at what he was trying to say. And again, it was, the dog whistle that was being sounded. What he was saying was, you don't want lots of people moving around and coming here and causing disruption and others, basically. Well, this is a reason why we actually need to do something about climate change. And we know that, and I'm not saying this was Johnson's intention at all, but we already know there's a whole conspiracy theory called the Great Replacement, which is prevalent in far-right circles, which is all about how the so-called, the West is being overtaken by migrants from the so-called global South who are trying to replace white people through migration and bring with them their own religious laws and all this sort of thing. And so it really does, these things have consequences. They all seep into the political culture and the society that we're all swimming in. And I think and the thing is, he just doesn't seem to care. It really does just seem to be about his own political survival. And the people around him, Priti Patel, all these people who owe Johnson their careers, essentially, owe him their positions in the cabinet. They're just seemingly being given free rein to do exactly what they want. And again, I mean, they just can't, we're just so far past the point where anyone can stand back and have a look at the sort of implications of this on our politics and our society as a whole.
That's Hardeep Matharu. Hardeep is the editor of the Byline Times. I'm Adrian Goldberg, and we've also got councillor John Kyle with us. John is a councillor for the Ulster Unionist Party in Belfast. And we're just talking about the European Convention on Human Rights and what might possibly link Brexit, the Northern Ireland Protocol and Rwanda. Strange as it seems, there is a connection. You're listening to Byline Radio, or if you're listening on catch-up, to the Byline Times. And all this is funded by subscriptions to the Byline Times, which is a brilliant monthly newspaper that Hardeep edits. If you want to support our work in being a free and fearless, independent journalistic outlet, then please consider taking out a subscription to the Byline Times. Very reasonable, only I think £39 a year for a basic subscription, and you get all sorts of interesting additional content in the print edition that you don't get anywhere else. So head over to our website, bylinetimes.com, and there you can find details of how to subscribe. That's at bylinetimes.com. It supports Byline Radio, the Byline Times podcast, Byline TV as well. And I'd also recommend you to check out the Bylines app on Apple, and I think soon on Android, if it's not there already. It's a brilliant app that opens the world of our Bylines empire to you. So please think about downloading, and it's free, by the way, the Bylines app. John Kyle, you are a councillor in Belfast, so you see how this apparent lack of strategy by Johnson plays out on the ground. And I suppose this is the concern, that real people may get hurt. I don't want to over-egg the situation, but as the marching season approaches, is there a risk that the disagreements over the Northern Ireland Protocol could spill over into violence?
Well, instability is never good, Adrian. And this is a very difficult area, because if you begin to talk about potential violence, you get accused of either scaremongering or stirring it up. So sure. It is difficult, but it's perhaps worth saying that we went through 30 years of civil conflict, of political violence. We had over 3,500 people died in the course of that conflict. We had thousands that were injured. It was a very dark time in the history of Northern Ireland and of the United Kingdom and of Ireland. Since 1998, we have had increasingly stable political institutions. The economy has been rejuvenated. Civil relationships have been renewed. So there has been enormous progress. But since Brexit, since the introduction of the Northern Ireland Protocol, as we said at the start, the balance that was achieved through the Good Friday Agreement, the just and equal treatment of the identity, ethos, and aspirations of both communities, as it says, that has been seriously impacted, and it has destabilised Northern Ireland. Now, the problem, I think, is that, well, if I say to you that there have been no serious negotiations around the Northern Ireland Protocol since February. So we have a situation in Northern Ireland where our political institutions are now deadlocked. They're not functioning. We have got increasing anxiety about the economy, about the cost of living. We have got tensions within communities, anger within the unionist community, protests about the protocol, and we've got a prime minister who appears to be disinterested. Where there's no sense of urgency to deal with these problems. And the thing is that there is people can see clearly where the solution is. There is a solution to this impasse. As they talk about, I heard Conor Burns, the minister, say earlier on today that the landing zone is clear. All sides agree what needs to be done, and yet there seems to be a disinterest. There's an inflexibility with the European Union, and there is disinterest, a casual disregard, it appears, from the British government to deal with what is a very real problem.
And John, I'm not here to defend the European Union, far from it, but the fact remains that the Northern Ireland Protocol was signed by the United Kingdom government. It was part of the oven-ready deal that Boris Johnson himself agreed with the EU, and having signed the deal, it's now the UK which is unilaterally seeking to rip up the deal. So, yeah, I don't know if the EU are being inflexible, but, you know, they may think they're entitled to say, well, a deal is a deal, and both sides entered into it freely. What about Johnson himself, though? How is he regarded by unionists?
Well, the difficulty for many unionists is that Johnson gave his word that there would not be an Irish Sea border. He said, if you're given documents to complete, tear them up. There'll be an Irish Sea border over my dead body. So he patently lied about what was coming, about what he had signed up to, about what he had agreed. So that, I think, has really seriously undermines his credibility. The second thing to say is that when you are, there is a problem, undeniably a problem within the Northern Ireland Protocol as it was negotiated. Now, everybody now agrees that there's a problem. And Maros Sefcovic today made further concessions, significant concessions, recognising the problems that unionists are experiencing. The American administration recognises that there are problems. The British government, in its command paper, recognised that the Northern Ireland Protocol was unsustainable, to use David Frost's words. But yet,
Brexit negotiator.
Yes, exactly. Lord Frost, the Brexit negotiator. So given that, it seems to me that there is a responsibility on the British government to therefore, with good faith and with honesty and with clarity, seek some sort of negotiated agreement, compromise with the European Union. It's there. Everybody recognises what needs to be done. But the way that Boris Johnson has conducted himself has been to cause nobody can see that Boris Johnson is acting in good faith. He continually does things that are provocative, that are insulting, that are that cause problems in terms of the negotiation. And to have a negotiation, there has to be some measure of trust. You have to accept that the person with whom you're negotiating, if they reach an agreement, that they will stick with it. And I think that this is the problem, that level of trust has been absent for some considerable length of time. And it has been, I think, as a result of many of the decisions that have been made by the British government.
And you say, John, that there is a solution and that all sides can see it. What is that solution?
Well, the solution was proposed 2 years ago by the Ulster Unionist Party. It's green and red routes into our channels into Northern Ireland, so that goods that are coming from Great Britain into Northern Ireland that will remain in Northern Ireland should be able to travel in without checks or without any customs declarations, because they are not presenting any sort of a threat to the European Union, to the single market of the European Union. Goods that are travelling via Northern Ireland into the European Union will go through a red channel, and they will undergo customs declarations, regulatory checks, etc. But 90% of what comes into Northern Ireland is coming to remain within Northern Ireland, or else to return to Great Britain. So therefore, there really is logically no need for those goods to have customs declarations. And that I think is recognised now by many people who said there needs to be rigorous implementation of the Northern Ireland Protocol. Now accept that actually that is disproportionate. It's damaging. It damages the Northern Ireland's relations with the rest of Great Britain, and so therefore those proposals are very reasonable proposals. They can be implemented. A dual regulatory system has also been proposed, and again that would resolve many of the problems. So there are issues. There are measures that can be agreed upon that will resolve the vast majority of the problems arising from the Northern Ireland Protocol.
In the meantime, I recognise this isn't your party, you're the Ulster Unionist Party, but
Yep.
The other Unionist Party, the DUP, the Democratic Unionist Party, are effectively holding the government to ransom, saying that Stormont, the devolved assembly in Northern Ireland, cannot resume until the Northern Ireland Protocol issue has been resolved.
Well, you see, Adrian, I disagree with the Democratic Unionist Party over many things, but the fact of the matter is that they went into our last election here and they said we will not enter Stormont unless there is a resolution to the problems arising from the Northern Ireland Agreement, Northern Ireland Protocol. Now, this is at a time, again, I say it once again, that the British government and the European Union were not engaging in negotiations. The Democratic Unionist Party said this has to be resolved. This is damaging to our country. This is destabilising our political institutions. This is risking the peace. So therefore, there needs to be some sort of resolution. The Democratic Unionist Party received substantial support. Many of their candidates were returned as MLAs. So since they said to the electorate, we will not enter into an executive unless these problems are addressed, I don't see how they can enter into it. Now, if the British government and the European Union were to reach some sort of agreement over the Northern Ireland Protocol, then we could resume politics as normal here. So yes, there is a problem. I think they were foolish to put themselves in that position. We have many things that need to be addressed here by our political institutions. They have ground to a halt, but one has to acknowledge that the DUP set out their stall. They said we will not enter into an executive unless the Northern Ireland Protocol is resolved. So therefore, I think the onus is on the British government and the European Union to sit down together and to start negotiating. They aren't negotiating. They need to sit down and start negotiating. There's considerable agreement. As Katia Adler said 2 days ago, the differences between the two sides are minimal. There's very little difference between them. They need to sit down around a table, begin to negotiate in good faith and reach an agreement. That is eminently possible.
Hardeep, before we finish, I just want to talk briefly about, as well as Northern Ireland, about Rwanda and the government's dislike of the European Convention and the criticism of lawyers. I know you touched on this a little bit earlier, but I don't know about you, I find it a little bit scary that we can have a government that regards inconvenient rulings of something as fundamental as the European Convention as human rights as something that would justify potentially leaving the convention. I mean, the convention is the backstop for all of us, isn't it? And things like a convention on human rights protect everybody in society, rich or poor.
Absolutely. It is really worrying, Adrian, because I think, these narratives that we see around human rights, they have been developing for a while. They definitely got worse in their weaponization and their sort of, how extreme they are under Johnson and his administration. But they have been going for a while, post 9/11, new Labour government. There was a lot, there's a lot in the media and in public discourse about terrorism, terrorist rights, the fact that they were being prioritized over, public safety potentially because of the Human Rights Act, which is something that the UK had enacted. There was, so many front pages full of that in, the war on terror era post 9/11. And as I was saying, that was happening under a Labour government as well. I don't think enough was ever done to actually communicate to the public why we have the Human Rights Act, what the European Convention on Human Rights is, what it came out of, which was, the atrocities of the Second World War. If anything, all these narratives and these tabloid headlines have been used by politicians of all stripes, to be honest, to gain voters and gain support amongst people who want a hardline approach, apparently, towards law and order. But as you say, what is missing from that narrative is the fact that, in a minority of cases, a tiny number of cases, the Human Rights Act will have been used by people who are accused of terrorism or, offences such as those. But in the vast majority of cases, it is ordinary people who can rely on the rights that are enshrined in the Human Rights Act. So, if you can, because we have the Human Rights Act, we have certain rights which we expect to be abided by in this country. And if we think that that's not happening to us, that either our own government or sort of an arm of the state is not treating us in accordance with the rights that we have, we can go to the European Court of Human Rights, which has nothing to do with the EU, as we said earlier. And we have that court who can make a judgment on whether, we're being treated properly by our own national government and institutions. And that is the bread and butter of human rights law in this country. It's ordinary people relying on rights to safeguard themselves and their lives. And that is completely missing from the narrative around rights. And I think a big mistake actually was, before we even got to, as I said, the quite, in some ways, extreme and worrying, era of Boris Johnson, way before that, there was no sort of dialogue with the public about why we have these rights and where they've come from. And, I find it so hard to believe, really. And I have a law degree, and the first thing you learn as a student of the law, when we look at human rights and international treaties and what happened, during the Holocaust, you learn that the genesis of human rights law, modern human rights law in Europe today, is the Holocaust and what happened in World War II. Absolutely, that's the first thing you learn. And I always think it's absolutely incredible, the complacency and the exceptionalism that we have here, that, we'd rather not have these rights. I just cannot, I find it hard to fathom that, it's always better to have these rights so we can rely on them and have a benchmark than not to have them. And of course, the government will argue, well, if we were to leave the ECHR, and sort of get rid of the Human Rights Act. We'll introduce our own Bill of Rights. But again, the Human Rights Act incorporates the ECHR, which is it's an internationally recognized standard. It has a whole jurisprudence, we call it a whole philosophy and a whole series of, years and years of judgments and case law around it. It's really well developed. And so just to leave that and say we're going to do our own Bill of Rights, which again, if it's authored by this government, the aim, I doubt, will be strategic, well thought out policy. Again, it will be a politicized process. So we'll end up with a politicized Bill of Rights. And I just think the fact that Churchill, and how much the Conservative Party reveres Churchill, the fact that Churchill, had a hand in some of that work. And now we're here with Boris Johnson saying, well, we may just have to leave it so we can send some people to Rwanda. It's so stark, Adrian. It's so stark.
Hardeep, thank you so much for your time. Hardeep Matharu, the editor of the Byline Times. Thank you very much indeed as well to Ulster Unionist Party councillor John Kyle in Belfast. Thank you, John. Great to speak to you.
Thank you, Adrian. Pleasure speaking with you.
Thanks, John. I think it's been a really, really fascinating discussion. Thank you to everybody who has listened. And don't forget, if you do want to support the work of Byline Radio and the Byline Times podcast, please consider taking out a subscription to the Byline Times. You'll get details, and it is a brilliant newspaper, by the way, edited by Hardeep. If you do want to take out a subscription, you'll get details at our website, our news-breaking website, bylinetimes.com. That's bylinetimes.com. Every penny goes into supporting good, honest journalism. We'll see you again very soon. Stay tuned to our Twitter feed at Byline Radio to find out when we're going live next. We'll be with you again very, very soon. Take care now. Bye-bye.